I don't know about you, Pa, but whenever I'm about to start something, I always want to finish it.
Yes, I agree with you.
So should we go to the bar? Well, I think we can make a start. This evening is a very happy celebration of the Walbrook Club's 20th anniversary. I don't believe it was on the 18th of September, but now is a good time as any, since it's an Indian summer, and autumn is nearly upon us, the winter's nearly upon us. So this evening begins with an interview about the club. We go downstairs for an aperitif, and then we come back up for dinner. So, Pa, should we start?
Yes, off you go.
Why don't we begin at the beginning? Do you mind if I call you Pa?
No. Papa, perhaps.
Who is that gentleman?
Ooh, I seem to remember him. I'm very short-sighted nowadays, but I think that's my father, his grandfather.
And where was he from?
Well, he was born in London, but they were Italian, first from Sicily and then from Naples, and they're immigrants, and arrived in about 1895. He was born, my father, in 1901 in the city. Well, not in the city, because he was in the East End. They had no money and very little prospects. They owned and ran a cafe, which wasn't very successful. Anyway, that was his background. No education at all. He couldn't afford education. So they kicked him out of the house because he was a bit precocious when he was 12 and said, "You're on your own."
And what did he do in life? What was his métier?
Well, he had an amazing mind, financial mind. He was a figures person who would have, I think, graced almost any financial stage, and with great distinction. And he had a photographic mind, photographic memory, unlike anyone I've ever met. Not that I've met them all, but he was an extraordinary man. And he educated himself this is 1913, just before the First World War. He used to go to public libraries because they were free. And he read, and he remembered, and he absorbed, and on all sorts of subjects. But that's how he never took an exam, but that's how he educated himself.
Do you feel pressure, Lana?
What?
being a descendant of this demigod with a photographic memory. I mean, I feel pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I do not have a photographic memory.
No, nor do I.
No, he was amazing. I remember he sat here and I sat over there for 28 years, 5 days a week. And I remember him saying to me once, I've got a problem here, and I had a similar problem. This was in the 1960s. I had a similar problem in 1933 with Jones Lang Wooden. They were the estate agents, surveyors. And he said, I think it was on the 17th of April that I wrote them a letter. See if you can find it for me. And there it was. Amazing.
So we are sitting in a Lilliputian townhouse that has garnered a great deal of affection amongst passers-by. And of course, everybody sitting in this room. Grandpa wasn't an architect, but he had a hand in designing it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He was. He had a very good eye, and but he was a sort of quixotic character. He had a man called Simons. Simons was the great authority on clocks and watches, and wrote the authoritative works on clocks and watches. So I think he roped him in, and he had Cecil Clutton, who was another one. He was the authority on not only watches and clocks, but virginals and harpsichords. So I think the three of them got together, and I can't remember who the architect was, because you had to. What? No.
White Alum? Alum White?
Probably White Alum. White Alum were wonderful sort of upmarket contractors, and they conjured this up. This room actually was half the size in those days. As I say, he sat there, I sat over there, and we had 28 very happy years.
Going back a few years before that, what was between the Church of St. Stephen's and Rothschild's?
Nothing. Nothing for 1,000 years.
Gosh.
I mean, Rothschild's were on the other side of this wall, but there was nothing here for 1,000 years.
And how did this fall into our orbit?
It fell into our orbit because St. Swithin's house, next door to the south, was in those days Salters Hall, the headquarters of the Salters Company, a very distinguished small company, but going back to the 12th century. And they were the providers of salt, unexceptionally. And the Luftwaffe came over, and I don't know whether they were after the Mansion House one night or 2 nights. It was a 2-day raid in May 1941. But they demolished Salters Hall completely. Made a big hole in St. Stephen Walbrook, Stephen's Church, and made a nuisance of themselves. And there it stayed, as far as the Salters company was concerned, to the end of the war. So fast forward till 1953, and my father was in touch with the Salters and bought the site from them, the whole site. And on this little piece, which had never been built on for 1,000 years, he put this little house as the family, which became the family office. And that's how it transpired.
And from 1953 to 97, when it was our office, this was your actual office?
Yes.
And then what was, if this room was in half, what was on the other side of this bit?
My father's secretary, and then further, then to the left, outside, was a very antediluvian bathroom, and then another office, which one of the people... Well, I mean, we only had about 4 or 5 people working here. That's all he ever had.
The rest was wine cellar and...
The rest was wine. Well, when I came in, it was wine cellar, wine cellar and
humidor.
Humidor, and in what we used to call basement, but was now called lower ground floor, because it's supposed to be more posh. We had a dining room, which was a great addition to the facilities of this little house.
And what was the bar?
The bar was the general office. Those of you who know the bar, David, you know the bar.
Thank you.
The bar was the general office, the most dreadful room. full of typewriters and filing cabinets, those awful steel ones, and telephone, the old-fashioned telephones. It was very, very old-fashioned. And I know my father and I used to go out to Sweetings down the road for lunch whenever we, and we would have a 20-minute lunch. It smelled terrible, Sweetings, because there was no air conditioning, nothing in those days. Sawdust on the floors. It was a wonderful fish restaurant. But 20 minutes was our maximum. We'd come out smelling like fish. That was it.
And in 1997, I believe you had lunch with a man called Mark Burley.
Yes, dear Mark.
And how did you first meet him?
I can't remember, but it must have been nightclubs, I think, which he was very good at. But I actually became a founder member of the real Annabelle's, which has been superseded, of course, now. We got on well, and he asked me if I'd become a founder member. And I said, yes, I'd love to become a founder member, as long as it's not too expensive. And he said, well, I'm charging my founder members £7 a year. And that's what it always remained from that day until the day he died. £7 a year was the annual subscription to founder members of Annabelle's. So actually I'm going there for breakfast quite soon, but as a life member. They made me a life member because I'm one of the last founder members of the
And you nearly worked with Mark Burley before this
Yes,
place.
we had, he said, funny enough, he and Terence Conran, who was a great friend of mine, just died, sadly, were good friends of mine. They both said, we must do something together. And I said, wonderful. So in Mark's case and mine, we had a building in Old Bovington Gardens, which had come into the family portfolio. It was the St. Regis Hotel, which none of you will remember. I didn't remember it myself. But it was a hotel, had two wonderful squash courts in the lower ground floor. Anyway, it got bombed by the Luftwaffe again. The hotel, my father did the financing for it, lent them the money, and of course they couldn't repay. So he had to foreclose, and the building became ours. And there was an occasion when there was an American gentleman called Armand Hammer, which David, you will remember the name of. Armand Hammer was an interesting character. He had helped the Russians in the revolution of 1917, in the sense that when the Russian Empire was taken over by 5,000 Bolsheviks, they had nothing. They had no pencils, they had no rubbers to rub out pencil marks. He provided all that sort of stuff. And they had no means of paying him. So they paid him in paintings, which by Russian painters, which were in the Tretchikov in Moscow. And that founded his collection. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing. And anyway, he went from strength to strength, and he wanted to open a gallery in London. I was approached by Richardson, his associate, and we were going to put Arm & Hammer Gallery in Old Burlington Street, in its reconstituted state from a hotel. In the end, it didn't happen, but we met Arm & Hammer, Mark and I, and Sandy Wilson, who was the architect, for lunch. And we went. He was having lunch in his private suite in Claridge's, and we went. We went in. Mark was very, he didn't stand on ceremony with anybody. We kept waiting for 25 minutes, which he didn't like at all, because and at intervals a porter would come in and say, "The great Mr. Hammer is not quite ready to see you." He is on the telephone to somebody in Moscow, the Prime Minister or somebody or other. And eventually he came in, carrying with him and putting on an easel a portrait of the Duke of Wellington, the great Duke of Waterloo fame. And he said, he didn't say hello or anything. "I'm taking this afternoon to Moscow, and it's my present." It was a Goya. I mean, come on.
So Mark would have designed the gallery?
No, Sandy would have done the architecture, Mark would have done the interior decoration. Anyway, it was decided finally that he didn't want it. He wasn't going to open a gallery in London, etc., etc. And that was that. So that was the first abortive one, and the second was here when we had lunch at the this time at the Connaught. And Mark was one of those people, he wasn't really very ambitious, but people would write to him and say, "Oh, Mr. Burley, would you do us a bar in Acapulco? Would you do us a bar in far Bombay? What about, this, that, and that?" And he was not interested. So I broached the subject, and he said, "Well, this is the second time we've tried. Maybe this won't work, and the third time we'll be lucky."
Would you mind doing an impression of him?
"Mark Burley, you speak rather like this, I can't tell you how perfectly bloody it is to be the Prince of Wales."
So you had a good lunch.
We had a good lunch, and then we came here, and he said, "Yeah, I think we can do something." And that was the second, and he said, "Second time lucky." He said, "It's going to be a good project."
So the idea was to introduce elegant rooms and delicious food in a part of London hitherto deprived of it, presumably.
Well, I mean, there are clubs in the city of London. I believe they still exist today. But they are they're not that good. And so we thought, Hyatt and I thought, my wife and I thought that this was after my father had died. Obviously, we thought that it would be a nice thing to do, to offer the City of London a very central location, perfect location, next to the Mansion House, within a stone's throw of the Bank of England and anybody else you wanted to see. This would be a nice place to do it. And so Mark was all for it, and away we went. The problem was, with Mark being the sort of person he was, to get a figure for the cost of converting the old building into this was impossible. I mean, he would say, "It'll cost what it'll cost." And it's very difficult when you're going to a bank and saying, "We'd like to borrow some money from you." And anyway, in the end, he gave me a figure which she then exceeded by twice, 2 times, but had the very good argument that he said, of course, you won't be able to, it's so beautifully done. You won't have to spend a penny on it for 20 years. Yeah. And it was a rather compelling riposte. Anyway, here it is, and this is what he did. And he was a great and wonderful man, difficult, but extraordinary talent.
To bring in my mother, who ran it for the last 18 years. Wow. And ran it through two recessions, a Labour government, which is perhaps the most offensive element, 3 enormous developments. You managed to keep the place going, Ma.
Well, people like Abdul, Henrietta, Michael, and David, and so many other friends and supporters, we were able to navigate through it.
Before we hit the home stretch, we're going to quickly touch on one of the most remarkable culinary geniuses exported from France to this country, Albert Roux, who essentially set up the kitchens. But Pao, you had a relationship with Roux before he got involved with this place?
Well, yes. I mean, Albert Roux and his brother Michel, who died sadly a year or 2 ago, came over to this country in 1945 after the war to set up restaurants. They had no money at all. And they went to see Peter Caslett, who was the Queen's trainer of racehorses, and who had a lovely house and country house cricket. They said to him, look, can you give us a job? And he said, Peter Caslett said, yes, I'll give you a job on one condition. You must both be here working for me for 5 years. And if you pass that test, I will set you up in business in 1950, which they did. And that's how they got their start. I mean, both supremely talented chefs. And so I got to know him quite early on because I was a friend of Edward Caslett, his son. And that's how it happened.
And I'm so pleased it did, because I could be biased, but I believe our reputation in Clubland is as having the best food.
Yes, yes.
Which is wonderful.
Yes.
So, one final bit from me. I'd like to ask you and Mother a couple of your favourite highlights of what's been a tremendous adventure stretching 2 decades.
Oh, Margaret Thatcher coming here for lunch. I don't like rare roast beef. We had a roast beef on a trolley, a la Mark, I think. Roast beef should never be eaten rare. It should be well cooked. This thing was produced. It was oozing blood, and so she came here 2 or 3 times, and we had lots of fun, but full of advice and opinions and so on and so forth.
And favourite city breakfast, if you can identify?
Gosh, well, for glamour, Joanna Lumley.
Well, it's hard to argue with.
What about Princess Diana, Peter?
What about her?
She had a soft spot for you.
Well, she was a friend, certainly, of both Hyatt and me, and but that's another story. Did she ever come here? I don't think she did.
No.
What?
He died in 1997.
Yeah,
And
died before we opened.
finally, your favourite fine wine dinner? Because we've had some wonderful ones over the years.
We have, yes. We have. Well, I suppose it would be probably Philippines Rothschild. Rothschild.
Very good.
And she was wonderful because she was a certain age and not well. She brought her son, Julien, with her. Wonderful lady and an extraordinary personality. And she gave us an incredible dinner here, which I think was probably one of the highlights of...
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And Ma, any highlights before we open up to the members?
Yes, I mean, Christmas. Learning about HR. That was a really interesting and wonderful discussion.
I hate to contradict you. It's a tremendous lowlight. Well, I'm going to regret this question, but this is posed to the membership. If we could add one thing to the Walbrook Club, what would you like? And no swimming pools or
Shooting range.
a shooting range,
Roof terrace. The lower ground.
a roof terrace,
Yeah, you could do that.
A cinema evening.
a cinema evening.
Yeah.
Well, we could certainly do that. I hope everyone's enjoyed the last, well, not 20 years, because most of us haven't been members for 20 years. But I hope you've enjoyed this club. I mean, I think it means a great deal to all of us. So,
Certainly does.
thank you for
Memories.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for keeping it upright, keeping my father and I honest. Above all else, I think we should celebrate this evening with reckless abandon, because 20 is a tremendous milestone. So, Pa,
And
thank you
Bob,
very much.
thank you for coming.
And Bob,
You've
of
been,
course.
I mean, you've all been wonderful supporters. But Bob, I think you've been here longer than anybody.
Thanks to you. Tell me why, because you and I met often when we were on the board of the Natural History Museum.
Yes.
What brought you to that?
What brought me to the Natural History Museum?
Yeah.
Oh, the chairman, the then chairman, came to see me, the Australian.
Oh,
Um,
His name was lovely.
yeah, and the director. And they wanted, I said, I don't know, I'm not an authority, I don't know anything about natural history. But you know a little bit about building, and we want to expand the Natural History Museum. And so one thing led to the other, and I became their sort of property advisor, consultant, whatever it was, and a member of the board, which was fascinating. And it was out of that the extension to the west, the cocoon, yes, took place, and various other bits and pieces. It was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And
You made a great contribution.
well, you're kind to say so.
Henrietta.
You said your father, Peter, so he was somehow chucked out of his family at 12 and left to go around self-educating himself. So we've got this East End little boy with no education. How did he end up building, getting into property and building actually an amazing business and doing so incredibly well?
Well,
and
he had a great.
launching his family into.
He was very determined. He was very charming. He was very shy, but he had that ability of being with people and creating feeling of trust instantly. They felt they could trust him. And he had a reputation of being, if he said he was going to do something, he did it. And on the dot. He didn't wait, wasn't never late for anything. I remember the first meeting when I came in 1958 here. I was 2 minutes late for a meeting. As I came through the door, they were all there and said, "Get out! You're late. Get out!" That was bad manners in his
How
vocabulary.
did he get into property?
I think he was always interested in building and in making things, in woodworking and that sort of thing. But he got into the financing of property in an interesting way, if it's not very boring. But he made friends with, he'd gone up to Newcastle to look at some property. This was in the 20s. And he was very young. I mean, he was, and he went to a firm of solicitors called William Mark Pipers, which in those days was the premier lawyers in Newcastle. Maybe it still is, I don't know. It's an old firm. And they were talking about financing this, financing that. But they had American clients who were also investors, who would come over here. Their antecedents were Scottish, and they left money with William Mark Pipers. And the instruction that if William Mark Pipers found a proposition in the course of their business, they were to cut them in. They didn't want to be consulted about it, just give $50,000. I mean, a lot of money, $100,000, a lot of money in those days. And use it as you think best. Wow. And that's how he started. William Mark Pipers provided the finance, because my father had nothing but a brain. He put the deal together. And then he had another friend called Sir Frederick Minto, who was my godfather as it happened. Most charming and lovely man. He was a contractor, like McAlpine's today. And he built great buildings, lovely. He did a lot to St. George's Chapel in Windsor, for example. Top class work. And so you had the three of them, the contractor, Frederick Minter, William Mark Pipers, and my father. They did these deals, and they gradually profited by them, and they split the profits three ways. Simple as that. If you could, he put the whole thing together. Extraordinary. And one thing led to the other, and he prospered. He always wanted to be. He was very shy. He didn't think that he had, and he did have, but he didn't think that he had the social graces. He spoke perfect English. He was charming, tough, honourable. That was it.
Would love to have met him, but I think everybody will look at that painting of Grandpa differently now. He's with us in a sort of curious way.
Yes, well, the left hand of his left hand, his right eye.
From our perspective.
Is by a man called Oskar Kokoschka, is rather hard if you look at it. And that represents his toughness, tough as nails. The other one, the left eye, is much more gentle and shows his generosity and the breadth of his understanding and the way his mind works. And so it was actually a very good psychological study of this man. And I said to him, I said to my father, this was in 1960 when he was 59. I said, Dad, I'd like to give you a birthday present. What is it? I said, I'd like to have your portrait painted because we've got no image of you. No, I couldn't do that. I couldn't sit still that long. And anyway, he said, "Who's the artist?" I said, "Oskar Kokoschka." Never heard of him. I said, "Well, he is actually quite famous, and he's Austrian and a founder member of the Blue Riders and so on and so forth." Anyway, I begged and pleaded with him for 3 weeks. How much was it going to cost you? I said, that's my business, not yours. And I said, you've got to go to Switzerland because that's where he lives. Again, out of the question. But after 3 weeks, he said, well, I'll give the man 3 days. So he went out there with his little suitcase, and 30 days later, he was still there.
30 days?
30 days. I mean, they had got this, totally different characters. It was a revelation for him for my father, he always told me. And they hit it off. It was a wonderful relationship, a lot of laughter, a lot of food being eaten, and that was the result. And I said to Oskar Kokoschka, what is this figure in the background, this sort of Vestal Virgin? And he said, I had to sum your father up quickly because originally he was only coming for 3 days. And I thought he looked lonely and sad. So I thought I'd give him some company.
Wonderful. Pa, thank you very, very much. Mother, thank you.
Not at all.
This really is the most special club, not only in the city, but London. Thanks to you.
Yes.
And to you and you.
And to you.
Well, I don't know about that.
What was that?
I think we should go down and accost the bar.
They're
Thank you.
going to set up here and we come back.
Thank you. Well done, Pa. Thank you.